sectoral ministries, for instance, Ministry of Public Work, for instance, build dam, but the irrigation, maybe the irrigation is not completed, or maybe the public work of ministry can also build dam and irrigation, but to support food production is not only irrigation and dam, but also how Ministry of Agriculture support with a good seed, with a new technology, with all effort. Therefore, by approaching this through integrated like this, we believe, the objective can be easily be achieved. The third component is food distribution and access to community. We also allocate budget through many ministries to achieve that specific objective. The fourth, managing food production failure and food problem. For instance, how to improve, to prevent waste. Right now, in many developing countries, usually, the waste lost during the process, the harvest, may reach about 20–25%. If we can reduce that waste, about 20%, that increase, it's similar to increase the production of about 20%. So we have attacked that problem, and then we attacked it through several ministries. Next, this is spatial, what we call it. For instance, we want to improve the production of food in Aceh province, the easternmost of Sumatra. And then over there, we're going to build 2 big dams. For instance, in Ruko and Keruto. That is 2 big dams over there. And then by building big dam, and then we'll see, how many kilometers of irrigation network, primary irrigation, secondary irrigation, tertiary irrigation, and then how many 1,000 hectares of rice field to be irrigated. And then, we also want to allocate X hectares, for instance, for what you call it, introducing kind of I forgot the term for that, organic farming practice, something like that. And then by partial agreement, approach like this, we can see the location. Specifically, we can see through the map, where that project to be put, and then where the new rice field to be opened, and then where the organic rice actually being planted. And by doing this, we can approach, we can observe, and we can monitor actually more effectively. By doing so, we believe, the objective can easily be achieved. Next, we see here how we do it step by step. First, the preparation, it's already done, and then 2016 we issue presidential regulation. This is underway, and then we also going to issue national action plan. But I just mentioned before, we put in the document national action plan one by one, project by project, program by program. And then in September 2016, there is another United States General Assembly. We're going to report about the 15 years of MDG implementation and the first year as SDGs implementation. And in 2017, the SDGs roadmap 2016-2030 actually will be in place in detail. I think that's all I want to share with you, how Indonesia prepared to implement this SDG. I believe if we can implement this, the objective of world community to achieve sustainable development goal, and will benefit all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for this very ambitious alignment of national program with the SDGs, and we are very pleased to learn these developments in Indonesia. Now, I would like to introduce His Excellency Amadou Ba. He is the Minister of Economy and Finance of Senegal. Since 2002, Mr. Ba has led successfully the Center for Large Business and Tax Department before being promoted to the Director General position of Taxes and Fields in November 2006. And he held this position until 2013 when he was appointed as the Minister of Economy and Finance for Senegal. Mr. Ba studied economics at the University of Cheikh Anta Diop in Dakar, where he got his degree of Masters of Economics and Business Management. Your Excellency, the floor is yours. And I am also very pleased to note that this is His Excellency's birthday, and we would like to wish him all the best and health in the coming year.
Assalamu alaikum.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you for this kind invitation that coincides with my birthday, indeed. And may we meet again for many years in the future. I would like to thank also the IDB for holding this forum, which is an important framework to dialogue on major issues, and thank as well the Indonesian government for their welcome. We arrived to Jakarta in excellent conditions, and we know it's not easy to gather such an important meeting. And we are in an era where our planet is living critical conditions and circumstances relating to the deterioration of ecosystems, to the slowdown of world economy, the resource mobilization, and security-related matters. It was not easy to establish a large consensus on a paradigm development in terms of environment and in terms of production tools. We have to say that climate change is a major concern, in particular in Africa, including drought, soil deterioration, and coastal erosion. Such factors generates huge losses of profitability, including in agriculture, on which a great number of our populations live. And the commitments to reduce the greenhouse gases that has been manifested during COP21 with the limitation of the warming to 1.5 degrees. The energy transition has led with the optimal use of clean energy should be accompanied because of its economic and supported because of its economic and social impact. This behoves to the national actors first. This is why it is necessary to ensure the participation of all of us to implement Agenda 2030, to specify the roles and responsibilities of the stakeholders who have taken part to the preparatory process of this Agenda 2030. And as it has been developed based on a participatory approach, the Plan Sénégal Émergent coincides with the global agenda of sustainable development, and it enables to pool all the energies in order to achieve the objectives that we have set to ourselves. Indeed, while focusing on the structural transformation of our economy, the development of human capital, as well as governance and peace. The Plan Sénégal Émergent has the ambition to lead us to emergence in solidarity and a rule of law. We need, therefore, to better organize the development tools in order to have a performing economic system that is also equitable. In this respect, we aspire to have a strong, sustainable, and inclusive growth that would offer to each and everyone the opportunity to take part to wealth creation while respecting the ecological or environmental balance. The expansion of the economy requires conducive business environment, and the persisting world economic slowdown, especially in emerging countries and developing countries, might make it vulnerable, make the economic growth vulnerable. The exports of goods and services might suffer from the global economic slowdown and the reduction of the price of commodities, and it might affect the growth pace of our countries. Therefore, the contamination effect of this slowdown is a source of concern for us. Such a situation does not contribute to the reduction at the national level of unemployment and underemployment. Therefore, it is necessary, through reinforced partnership, to reconcile efforts and pool efforts in order to have an economic conducive environment to sustainable development. Ladies and gentlemen, with the reduction of the oil prices since January 2014, this has been a favorable circumstance for us as non-producing country. This drop is a factor of social stabilization for us, but also a leg up to the economic growth in our country, since the increase of household consumption stimulates the internal demand. The drop in the oil price contributed to reinforce the household purchasing power, as well as the relocation of the expenses in terms of hydrocarbons to other sectors. We need to make sure that this would not slow down the efforts, our endeavors for energy transition, for other alternative sources of energy. There is also another major challenge that calls upon all the stakeholders, that is the realization of SDGs should be carried out with a genuine partnership among all the stakeholders and players. A number of mechanisms have been identified in order to enhance such a partnership. The world leaders met in Addis Ababa in June 2015 for the third International Conference on Financing for Development, Sustainable Development, in order to identify the means to eradicate extreme development by 2030, to reduce inequalities and to promote development that is compatible with the fight against climate change. It is unfortunate yet to note that the illegal financial flows make $50 million lost for Africa, which hampers its development and threatens the economy of the continent. In this respect, the government of Senegal spares no effort so that the international financial institutions contribute to the fight against practices that are called the fight against embezzlement and money laundering. Mechanisms should be set up in order to recover such funds and to inject them in development projects. Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot we have to talk about the security threats against our economy. Terrorism is a permanent threat against our states, and it's against the opportunities of investment and employment and job creation. There cannot be any development without peace. This is why it is imperative to promote peaceful societies as stipulated by SDG number 16. The refugees crisis, as witnessed by Europe, due to the persistence of conflicts and continuous instability continues in certain regions of the world, does not contribute to the implementation of SDGs. Regarding health crisis, as the one we experienced recently in Western Africa, I mean the Ebola epidemics, it is important to develop strong synergies in order to enhance our health systems and to react vigorously to break out of such pandemics. In order to achieve the SDGs by 2030, huge efforts should be made in order to measure and evaluate the progress made. A mechanism for monitoring and follow-up should be set up, and we just had an example about that at the international level as well at the national level, as well as the stabilization of relevant indicators. It would be fundamental to continuously follow up and to be informed on the progress achieved in order to take collective steps on time. In this regard, I would like to recall that the MDGs evaluation and monitoring showed that the monitoring of data helps and facilitates to have targeted actions and to monitor the results and improve the empowerment of people. In this regard, the sustainable development requires a revolution of data, quality and relevance, and the dissemination of data as well and information. Therefore, sustainable investment with statistical capacities are necessary at all levels, especially at the national level, in order to support the implementation of programs of SDGs. In Senegal, our statistics system have been overhauled since 2005 with new economic guidelines in order to conduct an economic and social policy that is cohesive. The creation of a national agency on statistics and demography meets the concern of the authorities to have a structure that have a great management authority and to elaborate the economic tools and efficient tools in this new context of globalization and increasing demand for information. This new structure enabled to follow up the economic policy and the SDGs in particular. However, the follow-up of the MDGs lacked or was short of some information, important information and data, especially in terms of demography. And this has been corrected in Senegal through this new structure. I would conclude by focusing on the statistics importance and the financial data that is very important for us to follow up the SDGs and to build on the results. It is important that the states and donors invest on data processing and treatment and disseminate reliable data. The achievement of such an objective goes through the capacity building of human resources. I thank you very much for your kind attention.
I would like to thank His Excellency Amadou Ba for his insightful remarks and especially highlighting the role of monitoring and in this context the importance of statistical capacity building in our member countries. Now I would like to introduce His Excellency Mr. Tarek Bajwa, Secretary to the Government of Pakistan, Economic Affairs Division, and he is the head of delegation of Pakistan to the IDB annual meeting. He has served in different government positions, including Secretary Revenue Division, Finance Secretary, Senior Management Advisor, and also some positions at the Government of Punjab. And he has an MPA degree from Kennedy School of Government, Harvard University. Please welcome Mr. Bajwa.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. First of all, my thanks to the organizers of this program for bringing something which is very important and critical, especially to the third world countries. Before we talk about the SDGs, I think we need to review what went right and what didn't go right when we were talking about the MDGs. Globally, the MDGs were a success. The overall poverty numbers have been reduced to less than half, from 1.9 billion to around 800 million. The infant mortality rates, the maternal mortality rates have gone down. Access to potable water has improved. Sewerage systems have improved. So globally, things have really worked. And I think in any given period of time, the most success that we have seen or recorded has been during the period. And the fact that the MDGs provided focused attention for the governments on these areas certainly has helped in achieving those targets. When we come to Pakistan, we have some mixed results when we talk about the MDGs. We have been able to reduce poverty significantly over this period, from around 37% to about 12.4%. And not just that, it's also the regional distribution that has improved. Earlier, the poverty, there were two provinces which had high rates of poverty. And now when we look at the numbers, except for one province, the poverty prevalence is almost uniform across Pakistan. So it's not only that we have been able to reduce poverty, but we have been able to reduce regional disparities also. And what is also more important and significant is that there has been an improvement in the rural areas also. So that the urban-rural divide that we used to witness when we're talking about poverty, that has also significantly been reduced. But then there are other targets where we have not done so well. We have not been able to achieve the targets that had been set for school enrollment, for infant mortality. We're very close to that. But for maternal mortality, we have not been able to do very well. So I think that's what as a nation we started doing, and as a government also, that while we are committed to the SDGs, it was important for us to do some soul searching, do some deep analysis on what went right and what didn't go wrong when we were talking about and implementing the MDGs. And as a result of that, we were able to come up with certain lessons that we have learned from that, and our future interventions are going to be based on the lessons that we have learned from our experience with the MDGs. The first and the foremost lesson that we have learned is that this must be a national agenda. This must cut across the political divide. This must not depend on one political party being in power and the other political party coming afterwards. We are talking about a 15 years period. There is bound to be political change in this period. So there has to be, it must transcend politics. There must be absolute commitment of all political parties and everyone in the country towards this as a national agenda. We must adopt it as our own national agenda, not something that has been prescribed by development partners. So in light of that, the first thing that we did was that a joint session of Parliament was called, and the Prime Minister's SDG program was approved in the joint session of the Parliament. And the Parliament, almost the entire political spectrum is represented. So one hopes that in future there shall continue to be a full commitment from all political parties till such time that we achieve the targets. The second thing that we have learned is that we can't do it in isolation. We just can't say, all right, we are going to focus on MDGs while not focusing on the overall economy. If things are not going good in the economy, we will be resource short. There shall be a crunch. So we have to focus on the economy. And that's what we have been doing. We have been going through a major structural reform program. Our growth is now the highest in the last 7-8 years. We continue to show improved fiscal discipline. The fiscal deficit has been brought to less than half. The hard currency reserves are at the historic high. So things are improving. Inflation has been tamed. So we have to keep that in mind also if we have to continue to generate resources through the government for meeting those SDGs. But at the same time, while we're talking about the overall economy, we must also ensure that there has to be specific interventions when we're talking about SDGs and when we're talking about regional and local disparities. I think it will be when we're talking about the improvement in the urban-rural disparities that we have seen. And incidentally, in Pakistan, unlike most other countries, the Gini coefficient has also gone down. So I think something, the net transfer of resources from the urban areas to the rural areas has certainly helped in this. So we need to continue to focus on policies, specific interventions, where this trend shall continue. We just don't want growth, we just don't want growth where it is asymmetrical, where the rich continue to grow richer and the poor continue to grow poor. So we must also come up with specific interventions also. Security and climate change are the two headwinds that we will continue to face, at least in Pakistan. As they say, you can choose your friends, you can't choose your neighbors. We live in a very volatile region of the world, which has seen a lot of volatility, at least in the last 35 years. That has had a spillover effect in Pakistan also. As we speak, we have a major operation going on in our tribal areas. It has been going on for the last 12 years. It has had its effect in Pakistan. So unless we have good security, unless we have good law and order situation, things will continue to be difficult. I think Pakistan probably would be a unique country where inoculation teams are being targeted by these extremists, by these terrorists. So that is definitely and certainly is a hampering effect on our efforts. So overall, the government has to improve the security climate if we want to make implementation of these SDGs easier. Climate change, of course, we have had major floods. Again, it's been a dampener. It's been something that has diverted the attention of the country, that has taken up resources, meager resources that we have, away from direct intervention into something, into climate, into mitigating the flood effects of the floods. So we have to work on that also, and we are working on mainstreaming disaster resilience into all our development agendas. We are coming up with a disaster resilience mitigation fund, so that the mainstream budget is not impacted even if we have a natural disaster. Then we had certain structural issues. The responsibility, we are a federation, the responsibility of providing many of these services, especially in health, education, social sectors, water, sanitation, was with the provinces, while most of the resources were with the federal government. So in the 7th NFC, which was announced about 4 or 5 years back, there has been a clear shift of resources, of transfer of resources also. Earlier, the provinces were only getting 47%, now it's 57% going to the provinces. So what has been done is that we have moved resources to the organizations or to the provinces or the governments who are responsible for delivering these services also. Now what needs to be done in future is that we need to move to the next year, which is the local government year. And that is what the federal government is now asking the provinces to do, and in the process of doing that also. Because unless those who are responsible for delivering these services have the necessary financial backup, we will always continue to have a gap. When we talk about the MDGs, we were slow to start. It was only into 2010 that we were able to come up even with our indicators. We were able to finalize the indicators. Not this time. We have now in the Ministry of Planning Reforms, we have set up a project management unit from the very beginning, which is focused on implementing the SDGs. Similarly, in the provinces also, 3 of the provinces have also set up these units. They have been provided funding to do that. ₹1 billion in the federal government, and $500 million and 600 million and other numbers in the provinces also. So these are going to be units who are going to be tasked with implementing the SDGs, which, as I said, when we were talking about MDGs, we were slow on taking off. One of the challenges that we continue to face is human resource. I think we need to develop more managers. This is something that we are focusing on, but we need better managers. We need better implementers. It's good to have a good policy. It's good to, it's good on paper, but who's going to implement it unless we have the necessary human resource? And we need it at the district level. We need it at the level, at the implementation level. So this is another area that we are focusing on. This is work in progress. I cannot say that we have achieved it, we achieved any specific targets that we have set for ourselves, but this is one area that is important and critical, and we would need to continue to focus on that. We will have to embed technology into our implementation systems. And we have seen when we were talking about the MDGs that it has helped. When we talked about school enrollment, we used cell phones. And as a result of that, we were able to get better results on monitoring of not only the teachers, but also school attendance. So that has helped. Similarly, when we were fighting dengue, we used an IT dashboard, which helped us to pinpoint the prevalence of the disease in a specific area, right down to the few households. So that has also helped. So I think we need to embed technology into our delivery systems in order to see that where what is working and what is not working, and then take corrective measures as we go along. The government cannot do it alone. I think that's also something that has very clearly emerged from our partial success in the MDGs. We shall have to mobilize the social entrepreneurs. And I understand that in one such individual was a panelist in the morning also, from a gentleman who is running a Khuwat, which is a microfinance, non-interest-based institution. They do not charge any interests, and they are providing microfinance for job creation. Similarly, I think we have other organizations also. We had the Poverty Alleviation Fund, which has been able to go across to 7 million families. We have now changed that into a Pakistan Microfinance Investment Corporation. The whole idea is that we need to leverage resources from the private sector also. So that is another important area, leveraging from the private sector. How is it that the available cash-rich banks can be brought into our programs and projects, and how is it that we can use that cash, that liquidity that the banks have today to improve our financial resources? Because anyone who's in the government would know that you're always cash short, and you need to supplement your resources through other measures. Corporate social responsibility is another area. I think we need to, they are there, we need to be more formal about it. We need to bring them more streamlined into our efforts to implement the SDGs. So these are, and last but not the least, I think what it is required is our continued support that we are getting from our development partners, partners like the Islamic Development Bank. They must come up with new instruments. When you are talking about infrastructure financing, the need is going to be there. The infrastructure gap runs into trillions of dollars for Asia alone. There shall continue to be claims from the infrastructure development side, but I think development partners need to come up with special instruments, with special resource envelopes for the SDGs, just and specifically for the SDGs, so that the competing demands from other sectors do not encroach into this territory. So this is something I think that we would continue to need. So, and the last word on the subject is that there shall have to be a continued commitment of the governments, whoever they are, from whichever political backing they are, to deliver and implement on the SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bajwa, for these insightful comments from Pakistan. And now we have listened to 3 country perspectives, and I would like to now move to the perspective from an international organization. UNDP will be playing a key role in the implementation of SDGs globally. So I am pleased to introduce Mr. Nicolas Rossellini, Deputy Regional Director for Asia and the Pacific, and Director, Bangkok Regional Hub, UNDP. Nicolas joined UNDP in 1986 as a program officer in Ghana. Since then, he has held a variety of positions in different countries, including Bhutan, Vietnam, Pakistan, and Ethiopia. Nicolas, please.
Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'd first like to thank the IDB for inviting UNDP to speak at this very important event. I'll talk a bit on the experience of the MDGs and also what some of the challenges are in terms of rolling out and implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. A lot of my information is derived from the Asia and Pacific region, but I hope it will also be relevant for those coming from other parts of the world. Next. As we've already heard, this is a very large and complex agenda, very interrelated, as well as the SDGs themselves. There are a number of related commitments that the international community came to during the meetings in Sendai on disaster risk reduction, in Addis on financing for development, and of course in Paris on climate change. I think put together these create challenges for implementation based on the complexity of the goals and the interconnectedness of the goals, on the need for much broader and deeper partnerships to make it happen, and on the resourcing, which I'll also touch upon. Next. On the plus side, it's a much more holistic, integrated agenda. In the past, the MDGs and the Sustainable Development Agendas were parallel tracks, parallel processes, and now we have one integrated, holistic agenda, which will both have to finish the business of the MDGs and integrate the issues of sustainability into that. Next. So the SDG agenda principles are based on universality, on integration, and leaving no one behind. In some ways, the MDGs were a great success, particularly in terms of reducing income poverty, and many of the other indicators as well. There was significant progress on aggregate. But when one disaggregates, as we heard from one of the previous speakers, we still see a lot of work to be done. There are groups, people living in remote areas, disadvantaged groups, vulnerable groups, who did not benefit from the tremendous economic and social achievements under the MDG era. And for UNDP and for the UN system as a whole, I think the issue of no one left behind is key to the successful implementation of the SDGs. Next. We have to take into account the unfinished business and ensure that we do deal with the millions of poor people still living in poverty and hunger without access to basic services. Gender inequality still is a major issue in many countries. And as I said, millions have been left behind, even in the most successful countries, and have been disadvantaged because of sex, age, disability, ethnicity, or geographic location. So there is this important agenda, despite all the successes, that has to be carried forward. Next. Just to show some of this, and this is specific to Asia and the Pacific, we can see in this region there's still close to 600 million people living in extreme poverty on less than $1.25, 1.4 billion living on below $2 a day, and 1.7 billion without access to basic sanitation. Next. On the plus side, the financing is there to make things happen. The SDGs will require an investment of around $3.3 to $4.5 trillion per year globally, and these resources are actually available. If we look at domestic public resources, these amounted in 2014 to about $5.3 trillion based on tax and revenues mobilized by governments. Domestic commercial finance, another $2.2 trillion. And ODA has been growing and it still remains an important source of ODA funding for LDCs and small island development states. And there are other sources as well that we need to draw on, particularly remittances is an interesting area. Next. Member states expect the UN to work together on this agenda, and there is a joint UN response. The UN Development Group has agreed on a framework, a way of working together. It's not prescriptive, but it is intended to draw the UN system together to collaborate in terms of supporting countries on mainstreaming the SDGs, international development planning, on accelerating achievement of the SDGs, and of providing policy support on the SDGs. And so this is a common agenda of support from UN agencies for countries. Next. The responses, as I mentioned, and UNDP working with other UN agencies is looking at what we can do to support countries in terms of implementation and rollout of SDGs. And one important one is preparing the roadmaps for SDG implementation and ensuring that SDGs, as we heard from His Excellency from Indonesia, is effectively integrated into national development planning. Next. It's also very important to join the dots. The UN can sometimes work in silos, government ministries can sometimes work in silos, and we need to work together and find ways and means of integrating the various approaches, the social and economic and environmental issues that have to be tackled in order to achieve the SDGs. The UN is committed to work together more closely, and we also need to help countries and governments to work together in a more integrated fashion and with other partners such as civil society and academia. Next. Research and analysis. This is something important in terms of understanding what needs to be done in the future. Next. And as we heard also from a previous speaker, the very important area of data monitoring and reporting. The expectations and demands on national statistical systems will be much higher in the future. There's the requirements to do more work on baselines and assessments, and we need to support countries in terms of how to use both traditional and alternate and non-traditional sources of data for analysis and implementation, including using cell phone technology and so on. I was asked also to say something on innovation in this context, and just want to give a couple of examples where innovation and new approaches can come up with solutions that can be easily upscaled and replicated by the government and can help contribute to achievement of the SDGs. For example, in Bangladesh, with a small initial grant to establish village courts, that has now been scaled up from 350 to 1,000 village courts across the country, which will provide access to justice to 20 million rural, poor and vulnerable groups. Similarly, in the Maldives, a project to connect citizens to local councils to resolve issues at the local level has now been upscaled by the government to cover all the islands in the Maldives. Next. On South-South, I think this would be a cornerstone of the successful achievement of the SDGs, and I think UNDP and the UN system will be ready to support countries to make that happen. Finally, the next slide, just to say, in implementing the SDGs, the importance of transparency and accountability, and UNDP is very proud that for the second year running, it has come top in terms of the International Aid Transparency Index. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
So we are pleased to listen to remarks by UNDP representative on the contributions of UNDP in the implementation of the SDG agenda. Of course, now the critical component of achieving SDGs will be the financing side. There will be an enormous financing need in the implementation of this ambitious agenda, and traditional source of finance will not be enough. So we will be looking at innovative ways of financing. And in this context, Islamic finance has really a promising potential. And at the IDB, we are very pleased to be the pioneer of promoting Islamic finance industry globally over the last 40 years. And in this context, I am very pleased to introduce you Professor Kabir Hassan. He is a professor of economics and finance at the University of New Orleans, but he is also the winner of IDB Islamic Finance Award this year. So I would like to congratulate him first. So, of course, he has been in the finance literature over the decades, publishing extensively, and he has been ranked in the top 100% in terms of publishing in financial literature journals. And he has been also advising countries on economic development and Islamic finance, corporate finance, and others. So Dr. Kabir Hassan will be talking about the role of Islamic finance in implementing this ambitious agenda. Please, Dr. Hassan.
A'udhu billahi minash shaitani rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Distinguished audience on the podium, and also the respected participants in this panel. And actually, the august audience who's sitting next to me have done my job easy, because they have pretty much laid down everything about MDG, SDG, country experience. So we started with MDG 2000 to 2015 with 8 goals. Now SDG 2050 to 30, we have 17 goals. So whatever the goals we have, we need money in order to implement this. And as a matter of fact, one of the estimates says that in order to implement these SDG goals, we need about shortfall about $2.5 trillion each year. So we need that amount of money, but where the money will come from? Now, when you talk about the SDG implementation, the most important part that we are talking about the developing country, and these 57 OIC member countries, is about 800 million poor people live within these OIC member countries. But interestingly, the people who live in the OIC member countries, majority population, and the religion is Islam, and Islam has a lot of many ways of solve this problem, the financing problem. Now we know that any sort of public good provision, there's a market failure. Market doesn't come up with to build a dam that does not have an individual benefit only. So when you talk about social benefit, we need something else beyond this. We had a panel session also chaired by Professor Sabas Alpe with impact financing. So when you talk about Islamic finance has something to give, and we have a big experiment failure in 2007 and 9. We have learned a lot of things, the vulnerabilities, the weakness of conventional financial system. Now we try to see whether that the West and this developmental agenda can learn something from the Islamic finance and actually can implement some of these things within the developmental process. So this brief introduction, I'm not going to spend time about these developmental goals because that has been covered by my previous speakers very nicely. But I want to emphasize the Islamic finance, how it can play a role. Now, the Islamic financial institutions can promote social and environmental goals indirectly by investing in the social sector to increase the capacity to produce social goods. And the capital markets can also contribute to the development of the sector, social sector in general, and Awqaf in particular. So let me start with this simple market operation, where the Islamic banks is playing a very critical role in many Muslim countries. And actually, one of the estimates, the Islamic finance industry is about $2 trillion right now, and is poised to be $3.5 trillion in 2020. It is growing 50% higher than the conventional finance. So what is the crux of Islamic finance? It is interest-free, but partnership-based financing. So it's a risk-sharing finance where everybody shares the risk, the borrower, the lender, in order to promote social goal. So there are many studies that have been done from the theoretical aspect, from the empirical aspect. It has shown the Islamic finance can be a better or alternative option in addition to conventional finance in order to promote social goal. Now, when we talk about in Islamic finance, of course, we do have these techniques that we use called murabaha, mudaraba, musharaka. Murabaha is sort of very similar to a working loan financing. Mudaraba and musharaka are very similar to partnership type of financing. The question is, we hear only about Islamic bank. The bank has some limitation what it can or cannot do. It can only do a short-term financing on the basis of murabaha. So we really cannot expect a bank to come up with and solve all the SDG problem that we have. So we need to have a sort of long-term financing. When we talk about long-term financing, so we really need to get out of this banking way of thinking. We have to come up with non-banking financial solution. So what are the non-banking financial solution? There could be a sukuk market, capital market. There could be social finance, the zakat, the Islamic way, the mandatory, the tax that you pay. There could be sadaqah, the people philanthropy. There could be awqaf. So one estimate in Indonesia, for example, there are about $60 billion worth of land lying, awqaf land. We simply, if we can convert this into income producing property, 60 billion, let's say 5% rate of return is about $3 billion you are generating additionally. And you can do a lot of things with this $3 billion. So SDG, you pick up any goal out of 17. When it needs financing, we can use that concept of Islamic finance, the social finance, in order to promote this. No, interestingly, we talk about only finance, but if you go beyond the finance, let's say we always, you ask for, if you go to a restaurant, if you're Muslim, you ask for halal food. But have you ever asked the halal food that you're eating is financed by haram money? It's very interesting. You import halal food or halal beef from Australia, but that halal food is being financed by interest-based financing from a bank. So there are so many different ways Islamic bank can really, or concept of Islamic finance can connect with this, the different aspect of people's life. Now, one of these things, don't misunderstand this concept, this shared responsibility we say, or the shared prosperity, that the concept that we are saying, it may be enshrined in the Quran, that is also has roots in other religion as well. The Christianity, the Judaism, the Hinduism, any religion that you talk about. So if something is good, why don't you implement this in our developmental agenda? Now, Islamic finance, however, has been not forthcoming infrastructure financing because it cannot do short-term financing. Given the focus on the real economy and preferences for risk-sharing financing, and social investment, the infrastructure sector provides an ideal business opportunity for Islamic finance. When we talk about infrastructure, Indonesia is coming out big with sovereign sukuk. We need money. Why do you have to back from outsider? We can really use our domestic resources, the people, engagement, financial inclusion. Then we can really borrow money with this innovative Islamic financial technique. For example, sukuk. We can use this technique in order to bring forth the awqaf industry into the mainstream finance. We can come with this microfinance, the concept, and that has been, Pakistan has very good, success case study, Akwat. Bangladesh is a pioneer of this microfinance, and it happens to be the Islamic microfinance in Bangladesh is the largest in the world really. 50% of the microfinance, Islamic microfinance coming from Bangladesh. So, Islamic finance promotes financial inclusion. It can contribute to aligning the incentive structure between the policyholders, investors, and fund managers to benefit the social and economic development. And it can contribute to financial stability and has demonstrated its resilience during the current financial crisis. So that's all. If you have any question, I'm going to pick it up during our question and answer session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So you'd like to, is this on? Okay. So I would like to thank Professor Hassan for this very concise contribution on the Islamic finance to SDGs agenda. Due to time limitation, I will skip my questions to the panelists. I will directly move to the audience. So we will have a number of questions, and please raise your hands and just briefly introduce yourself, and your questions should be concise. So we have one question from here. So let's have the microphone. Yes, to the front, please.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My name is Abdul Latif Bello from Islamic Development Bank. I do have 3 questions, 2 for Professor Kabir Hassan and 1 for Mr. Tariq. The first question to Mr. Kabir is that yesterday the Bank Indonesia stated that 3 challenges are preventing Islamic finance from helping to achieve the SDG. And these are the slow pace of Islamic product innovation, the lack of Islamic financial expertise, and adequate commitment to implementation. The question is, how can we overcome these challenges in order to support the SDG? That's the first question. The second one is 3 weeks ago, the S&P report entitled "The Islamic Finance Could Aid Modestly in Achieving the SDG." It noted that the ratio of Islamic finance assets to OIC total GDP has increased by 10 percentage points, from 22% in 2008 to 32% in 2015. Now the question is, how optimistic are you that the ratio will continue to increase despite global headwinds that is slowing global growth? The last question to Mr. Tariq. In Pakistan, a study recently released by the Leadership for Environment and Development, LEAD, titled "Translating Sustainable Development Goals at the Country Level," highlights that implementing the SDG will be a very difficult task, especially since the 18th Amendment has devolved multiple sectors such as health, environment, agriculture, and education to the provinces. My question is, how would the federal government coordinate the progress of SDGs implementation at the provincial level? Thank you.
Thank you. So let's...
Dr. Bello, if you could repeat the question only, the 2 questions that you asked.